One of the best ways for me to process emotion has always been to go for a walk. And I had felt some strong emotion lurking under the surface for quite some time. So when I finally got a couple of weeks to myself after a long spring and summer always in the company of others, I entered the woods to have a heart-to-heart conversation with myself. This emotion I had built up had been somewhat hard to grasp. Maybe it was all the distractions and lack of solitude that made me unable to really feel it or find it for quite a long time. I just felt it was there, in my stomach. At first, it reminded me of restlessness, boredom, or some sort of lack. Not a lack of someone, but a lack of something. I think it was the lack of feeling at home, in myself. And as the days passed by in my own company, I started to recognize this feeling, this void inside me, for what it actually was. I felt lonely. At first, it was hard to admit it. I had always thrived in my own company, so this time to myself was something I had been looking forward to. To breathe, be inspired, do creative work, and check in with myself. But now that I finally had it, it didn't feel good at all. No wonder I had distracted myself from it for so long. Loneliness is just the worst feeling of them all. And I am lucky and blessed enough to have family and friends in numbers, so I knew it wasn't a feeling of being alone. That's different. But I was lonely. Lonely in a way that I didn't even feel like socializing with all these wonderful friends of mine. But at the same time, I didn't feel like being alone either. And so I just stayed in between in some sort of limbo, not really getting anywhere. A guilty feeling accompanied it all. It didn't feel right to have all these great people in my life and still acknowledge to myself this loneliness that had grown forth. Because what was I left with then? And I just couldn't bear it now that it became so obvious what it was. It's harder to accept the feeling of loneliness when it's not due to a lack of people, I think, because then it's not supposed to be there, right? And as someone who had been on the so-called path of enlightenment, growing and evolving and waking up to the important stuff in life, I found it even harder. I, the spiritual enlightened one, with all I had come to know and understand, surely couldn't be feeling these kind of emotions. As I was having this intervention with my inner self among the trees, a question came to the surface. Maybe this was all part of the path I now was on. Maybe most people out there that walked the same path before me and was to walk it after me would all get familiar with this feeling at some point. Was there something to come from it all? Deep inside, I already knew the answer to this question. Yes, I knew that it had to be, because this path had already led me to see that every emotion is there to tell me something, to allow me to learn something new about me and my life and what I want and what I don't want. And that every situation comes with possibilities to grow and expand into something bigger. And that was when I had to admit to myself that this path was indeed a lonely one at times. We read about people that walked it before us and we listen to them and we learn from them, but it sure can feel lonely when we don't seem to find others walking it at the same time as us, in the same pace as us. And the feeling of connectedness was the main reason I even chose to walk it in the first place. But maybe that is the reason why we sometimes must walk it on our own. In order to feel connected to anyone or anything, we must first feel connected to ourselves, to belong in ourselves, to be at home in ourselves. And of course, it's difficult to find connectedness within when we are constantly distracted by other people and surroundings and inputs. So, during this walk, I came to find that maybe, just maybe, this aching feeling of loneliness was indeed a necessary feeling, at least for a while. Without it, it would be harder for me to find what I truly seek. Because let's be honest, what we seek is never really on the outside, is it? And I remember this quote I once read that truly spoke to me. The soul that sees beauty must sometimes walk alone. And I think it was Wayne Dyer that said, you cannot feel lonely if you like the person you're alone with. So going forth, my intention will be to try as best I can to minimize my resistance to this feeling. If there is one thing I know, it is that resistance towards anything only makes it grow bigger and last longer. A fight against something will still be a fight, and resistance surely is another form of distraction. I will try my best not to be distracted from this feeling, not to run from it, but to accept it and choose to believe that growth will come from it if I just keep walking. It's all in the power of the mind, and the ego doesn't like uncomfortable feelings. It thinks that the best it can do for us is to distract and mislead. But hopefully, this talk with myself found a way to reach my ego and say, hey, it's okay, this is actually good for me, or at least it will be in the other end of it. So let's just go with the flow for now. Let's just feel it and see what comes from it. And the next time my ego will try to fight or flight, because that's what it does, and so it will, I shall remind it of this. A season of loneliness and isolation is when the caterpillar gets its wings, and I have always wondered what it's like to fly.